Neal Battaglia here, saxstation.com. Alright, so I got a question from Ruben. Alright, so Ruben asked, I am new to playing the saxophone. I play music at the church I go to, and I want to get familiar with playing sax. I like the sound of the sax from songs like Maneater, Hall & Oates, Careless Whisper, George Michael. My question is, I don't know whether to purchase an alto or a soprano, and what is the difference between both? Thank you. So I actually hadn't played a lot of soprano until pretty recently. At the NAMM show, I tried quite a few different sopranos, and then I got my first soprano this week. So I'm just starting to play soprano. I had played soprano a few times before in my life, but not a lot. Overall, I would say that an alto or a tenor is going to be more generally useful. The, the difference between the instruments in the family of the saxophone is the size and the range, and also it affects the tone a little bit, how they're built. So all the saxophones are going to sound like a saxophone, but they're going to sound a little bit different, and you're going to be able to play higher or lower based on the saxophone you have. And you actually can get pretty high on tenor and pretty high on alto using what's called the altissimo, but it's really easy to get the really high notes on the soprano. So I think when you're first starting off, if you really, really like the soprano, if you know that's the sound you want, if maybe some of your favorite saxophone players are people who play the soprano saxophone, you can go for the soprano saxophone. If you're going to be playing the saxophone in church and you want to have more flexibility with what you're playing in terms of the range of the notes, if you want to be able to play a little bit higher and a little bit lower, the alto might be a good choice. If you actually want to go a little bit lower than that, if you like the range of the tenor, maybe that's what you want to go for. The soprano is kind of at the high end, and the baritone is kind of the low end. There are saxophones above and below those, but those are basically the top and the bottom for the most common saxophones. So it's going to be a little bit easier to play the alto, a little bit easier to play it in tune. It's going to be able to go a little bit lower in terms of the notes you can play. But I would say it's really up to you. Like, you could start with either one. If you really like, let's say, Coltrane on soprano, or you really like Kenny G, then maybe you should go for soprano. If you like people like Cannonball Adderley or Charlie Parker or Sonny Stitt or Maceo Parker, maybe you'll go for the alto saxophone. So it kind of depends on you, what you feel like you really want to sound like. Certain instruments play in different ranges, like the bass plays down low. The piano can play low, but it can also play high. With saxophones, the soprano is basically on the top. You can't go too low with it. It's an octave above the tenor, so the tenor can play a full octave below what the soprano can play. The alto is in between the tenor and the soprano, so it's kind of in the middle of the saxophone family. The tenor and the alto are both in the middle. The soprano is more at the top. The bari is more at the bottom. And the tenors can get pretty low, actually. In terms of the similarities and differences, they both have the same fingering system. The alto and the tenor and the soprano and the bari, all the saxophones have the same fingering system. The tenor is in the key of B flat, so it's the same as a B flat clarinet and a B flat trumpet. The alto is in the key of E flat, which is the same as the baritone saxophone. So you'll be reading the music a little bit differently. It's a little bit easier to transpose for a soprano or a tenor than it is for an alto. Not too much harder, but a little bit easier. You just go a whole step rather than a minor third. The difference is, so the soprano is a little bit smaller, depending on whether you get a straight soprano or a curved soprano. The straight soprano is going to be more like this. For the curved soprano, your hands are going to be a little bit closer together. The alto, your hands are more close together than the tenor, but it's maybe a little more comfortable if you have maybe larger hands. If you have really large hands, it might actually be uncomfortable to play the soprano. Some sopranos, like, you feel like your hands are really in close proximity to each other. So differences, it's a little bit easier to play the alto saxophone in tune compared to the soprano. The tone is a little bit different. It's going to be maybe a little bit brighter on soprano generally compared to the alto. A lot of your sound is up to you, though. So if I play a soprano, I'm going to sound like me, just because I've been playing a while and I kind of have a certain way of playing. I think I would maybe recommend for a general use, maybe the alto is going to be better suited to a lot of musical situations. The soprano kind of can cut through because it's up higher in the range. So maybe that'll fit with what you want to do. Maybe in your setting in church, maybe that'd be a good thing. The alto is going to be able to maybe blend a little bit easier, at least as a beginner. The soprano is going to be able to also blend in if you're kind of a more advanced musician. But yeah, so it's basically the range and the tone and how easy it is to play in tune.